You are listening to the Proverbs for Living a Fulfilling Life podcast. Hi, this is your host, Dr. Rick Upchurch. These Proverbs come from a lifetime of experience. My goal in sharing them with you is to help you avoid some of life's pitfalls and hopefully give you some tools to live a more fulfilling life. I hope you will ponder the proverb in this episode and take away something that you can use.
Episode 18, Inertia. Newton's first law of motion is also called the law of inertia, and it's stated like this: an object at rest tends to stay at rest, and an object in motion tends to stay in motion, and in the same direction unless acted upon by an outside force. Now let me break that down for you. Let's take the example of a basketball sitting in the gutter up against the curb. Now, that basketball is going to stay in that position unless something comes along to move that basketball. Maybe a kid comes down the street and picks it up. That's moved the basketball. Maybe a kid comes along and kicks it, or perhaps the wind blows it and it rolls a little bit down the street. It's going to tend to stay at one point unless something acts upon it to make it move. That's a very important point, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Also, an object in motion tends to stay in motion and in the same direction unless acted upon by an outside force. Let's take the same basketball. We'll start with that. You're taking the basketball and you throw it in the air towards the basket. Now, you and I know that that basketball will arch and eventually fall back down. Why does it fall back down? Gravity. That's right. Gravity is acting upon the basketball to pull it down, and eventually it will pull it all the way down, and unless something acts upon it, it will pull it down to the point that it comes to rest. So an action tends to stay in motion and in the same direction unless it's acted upon by an outside force. Take away gravity and push that basketball towards the basket, and you no longer have an arch. You have a straight line, and the ball is just going on and on and on. Now, Newton's law was directed primarily at physical objects. However, there is a very real lesson here as it applies to processes and people. Let's take a look at processes. Any process may eventually become so routine, so formalized, that it can turn into a bureaucratic dogma. Let's look at the forces that might act upon a process. You have a process in place, and it's going along, and it's going to stay going along unless it's acted on by an outside force. What's that outside force? It could be policies. That's always one of the things that acts on processes. A process is going fine until somebody decides they need to implement a policy or another policy. Or perhaps a process is going fine until somebody who was involved in making that process work left their job. And now that process has begun to change and morph and maybe go into a different direction. It's been acted upon by an outside force. Policies do that. We can become hidebound in tradition. Traditions can pull and be an outside force on processes. All of these things can affect processes, and when that happens, changing the process can become difficult or nearly impossible. But this law of inertia also applies to people, and here I think is where it gets to be really interesting. Henry Ford is quoted as saying, "Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right." And the meaning here is that we're constantly affected by the inertia of our minds and other outside forces. Let's take a look at how much we do. Let's take a look at a person. My perspective, my actions go forward in a linear fashion. I am living my life. I am going forward, and as I'm living my life, I think, man, I'm going to go this direction, but I get pulled into other directions by different forces. Inertia pulls me into another force so that I might be pulled into another channel of my career. I might be pulled into another relationship. I might be pulled into a different mode of thought, practice, habit. All of my life is affected by outside forces, and we don't always realize how much this is really impacting the very essence of who we are. But inertia applies to people in this respect. We are susceptible to the outside forces, just like that basketball was susceptible to gravity. Those forces can have a bearing on us to move us in different directions. How can that be avoided? What can we do to lessen these kinds of impact? And there are several ways to do that. One of the most important ways to do that is to find that you have settled the core values of your life. The basic values by which you live can keep the inertia causing dampeners of gravity and outside forces from impacting you and pulling you off stream. This is so important. Make sure that your core values are in place. And that must include a solid understanding of the whys that you do what you do and the values that are a part of that. And for me, that has to include faith. And I don't see how it can not include faith for anybody's life. And the people who don't have that core value in their lives certainly find themselves being pulled willy-nilly all over the place because of the various forces that are placed upon them. Forces that seemingly are out of their control, but they do not have to change you. And so the inertia that was first put forth by Newton that was directed at physical objects is really also affecting people, and it affects processes. But when it comes to people, we can lessen the effect of the inertia that is moving us off base by focusing on the core values that make us who we are. And so, as you're thinking about your life, as you ponder the directions that you have been pulled in by the many forces that have affected you up to this point, I want to encourage you to think about, ponder the depth of what it means to let your life be guided by values that will keep you moving the direction in which you have started, and in that direction with purpose and meaning. Thanks. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. Thanks for listening to this episode. I want to encourage you to please subscribe, and if you don't mind, refer the podcast to a friend. In every case, the information in these episodes is merely the tip of the iceberg of information related to that specific topic. Do a little research, and I'm confident you will find more information. If you want to get a hold of me, you can reach me by emailing proverbs@upchurch-consulting.com. I'll look forward to hearing from you. If you would like to know more about God's Word or how God works in the world and in your life, I highly recommend checking out Wesley Biblical Seminary. This is a solid, accredited seminary with fully online programs at a reasonable cost. Best of all, in my opinion, WBS approaches the Bible from a Wesleyan holiness perspective that embraces free will. You can check them out at wbs.edu.